I stood in my own kitchen doorway, the pink slip trembling in my hand, while Grant's laughter filled the space between us. Sharp, cruel laughter that turned my humiliation into his entertainment. He leaned against the counter, swirling wine in a crystal glass like he was celebrating. You? Fired? Honestly, Sylvia, I never imagined you could fail this spectacularly, he said, each word designed to cut deeper. I was 63 years old, and my ex-husband was mocking the worst day of my professional life. Not offering sympathy or even basic human decency. Just pure, unfiltered contempt. My chest tightened as the world seemed to shrink around me. But then something shifted inside. I remember the envelope my grandmother had given me years ago, the one she'd whispered about during her final days. Sylvia, one day the world will laugh at you. That's when you'll discover who you really are. I never understood what she meant. As I folded the pink slip, I noticed something else in the envelope. An old brass key with a note attached. My grandmother's elegant handwriting. My heart stopped. Could this be what I thought it was? 3 hours after Grant left, trailing expensive cologne and arrogance behind him, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The envelope from Grandma Evangeline felt heavier than it should. My hands shook as I carefully opened it, afraid and hopeful at the same time. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper. The words were written in her distinctive flowing script. Sylvia, my dearest, you are the heir to a fortune few will ever know. $400 million lies waiting for the one who endures without bitterness. Trust your mind. Trust your patience. With all my love, Grandma Evangeline Hartwell. I read it 3 times, my mind refusing to process the numbers. 400 million? I could barely afford groceries without calculating every purchase. My bank account had maybe $3,000 left after the divorce stripped me of everything Grant could legally take. But underneath my disbelief, something else sparked to life. A quiet, calculated determination that felt like waking up after a long sleep. I tucked the note and key carefully into my bag, understanding that while Grant laughed now, he had absolutely no idea what game had just begun. By morning, I was at the local real estate office, trying to find a modest apartment. Grant had cut off my access to our old accounts completely, leaving me scrambling for affordable housing. The agent, a young man named Callum Devereux with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch, looked me up and down with barely concealed judgment. 30 minutes into explaining my situation, he interrupted with a smirk. Oh, I actually just helped your ex-husband close on a penthouse downtown. Beautiful place, floor-to-ceiling windows. I wouldn't expect him to, share any of that with you. The humiliation washed over me in waves. Here is another person who saw a 63-year-old woman as someone to pity or mock. Someone who should quietly accept her circumstances and fade into irrelevance. But instead of crumbling, I felt the determination growing stronger. I smiled softly, letting my anger settle like sediment in still water. Callum thought he was being clever, showing off his insider knowledge. He had no idea I was carrying a key and information that would change absolutely everything about my life. That evening, I met with Lionel Braddock in a small cafe near his accounting office. He'd been my grandmother's accountant for 40 years, one of the few people she'd truly trusted. When I showed him the letter and key, his face went pale. Sylvia, are you absolutely certain this is real? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. I nodded, sliding the documents across the table. Yes. And I intend to claim what she left me. Lionel exhaled slowly, then pulled a worn leather briefcase onto his lap. Your grandmother built this empire quietly over 6 decades. Not just liquid assets, but businesses, trusts, offshore accounts, real estate holdings across 3 continents. If Grant or anyone else discovers this before you properly secure it, everything could vanish in days. The weight of his words settled over me. This wasn't just about proving Grant wrong anymore. It was about survival, strategy, and finally receiving justice for decades of being underestimated. Lionel handed me a USB drive. Everything you need to start is here. But Sylvia, there's one name on these files that should concern you more than anyone else. Harrison Langley. He knows the Hartwell secrets, and he doesn't forgive mistakes. Back in my tiny rented apartment that night, I examined the key and unfolded the aged map that had been tucked behind Grandma Evangeline's letter. The key was definitely antique, ornate brass with intricate patterns. The map showed faint markings in a code I recognized from my grandmother's old diaries. She'd taught me that code when I was 12, making it into a game during summer visits. One location stood out clearly once I deciphered the symbols. A property in the Catskills labeled Hartwell Estate, Access Alpha. My pulse quickened. This was the first step in a journey my grandmother had planned decades ago. She'd left me breadcrumbs, and now it was finally my turn to follow them to wherever they led. But as I carefully folded the map back into my coat pocket, movement outside my window caught my attention. A black SUV sat idling at the corner, its windows too dark to see through. My stomach dropped. Someone knew I was beginning this journey. Someone was already watching, waiting to see what I would do next. I arrived at the Hartwell estate just as dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The iron gates were heavy with rust, groaning like they remembered every secret this abandoned place had kept for decades. My grandmother's key fit perfectly into the old lock, the mechanism clicking open after 40 years of waiting. But the moment I stepped onto the grounds, I felt eyes watching from somewhere I couldn't see. Shadows moved behind the dusty windows of the main house. My rational mind said it was probably just trees swaying in the wind, but my instinct screamed that someone else was here. I forced myself to stay calm, breathing steadily as I approached the front door. Inside, the library was exactly where the map indicated. Dust covered everything, but the leather-bound journal sitting on the desk looked recently placed. I opened it with trembling fingers. My grandmother's handwriting filled the first page, slightly shaky, but still precise. If you found this, Sylvia, you are ready. But you are not alone in this journey. Trust carefully, because not everyone who offers help truly wants you to succeed. A muffled sound behind me made me spin around, my heart hammering. Footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Then, everything went silent. A figure emerged slowly from the shadows near the library's back entrance. Tall, thin, unsettlingly calm. He moved like someone completely comfortable in this abandoned estate. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. Every instinct told me to run, but I stood my ground. In this isolated house, fear would only make me vulnerable. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady despite my racing pulse. "A friend of your grandmother's. You can call me Langley." He stepped closer into the dim light filtering through the dusty windows. Harrison Langley. The name from Lionel's warning. He handed me a small envelope, his movements deliberate and measured. Inside was another map, this one showing hidden tunnels running beneath the entire estate. A note was attached in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Do not trust anyone claiming to help you. Grant Caraway is not done with you yet." My stomach turned cold. Grant had never forgiven my grandmother for keeping family secrets from him during our marriage. He'd always felt entitled to the Hartwell wealth, believing marriage gave him rights to everything. Now, at 63, I would have to outsmart him using skills I wasn't sure I possessed. Following Langley's map through winding underground passages, I found myself standing before a steel vault door. A combination lock gleamed in the weak light from my phone. My grandmother's journal had provided the first clue, buried in a riddle about numbers that never age but always hold value. I worked through the logic carefully, remembering her lessons about patience and observation. The combination clicked open on my third attempt, the vault door swinging inward with a heavy metallic groan. Inside were stacks of documents in protective sleeves, antique ledgers bound in leather, and a safe deposit key marked Langley Financial Trust. Among everything else, I found a letter addressed specifically to me in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. "Sylvia, the world will call you old, irrelevant, past your prime. Let them. This inheritance is about wisdom, patience, and seeing beyond what others desire. You have always had these qualities, even when life tried to convince you otherwise. Use them now." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully gathered the most important documents. But then I heard it. Footsteps echoing through the tunnels behind me, getting closer with each passing second. Grant's voice carried through the underground passages, angry and disbelieving. She has the key? After everything I've done to keep her away from this place. I ducked behind the vault shelves, pressing myself into the shadows while my mind raced. He'd followed the paper trail somehow, probably through connections I didn't know he had. But he wasn't alone. I heard at least 2 other sets of footsteps, heavy boots on stone. My heart pounded so loud I was certain they'd hear it. I watched through a gap in the shelves as Grant appeared, his face twisted with rage and greed. The men flanking him looked like professional security, not the kind of people who ask questions about legality. Using the hidden exit marked in my grandmother's journal, I slipped through a narrow passage that led away from the main tunnel system. The route was tight and dusty, clearly unused for years. I emerged into the forest surrounding the estate, clutching the safe deposit key and most crucial documents. Behind me, I heard Grant shouting orders to his men. They would search the tunnels, but by then I'd be gone. I moved quickly through the trees, staying low and quiet like my grandmother had taught me during childhood games that now seemed like training. I stumbled through the dense forest for what felt like hours before seeing smoke curling above the trees. A small cabin appeared through the branches, warm light glowing in its windows. Before I could decide whether to approach, the door opened. A woman stepped out, striking even in simple clothing, with sharp gray eyes that immediately reminded me of my grandmother. "You're Sylvia, aren't you?" she asked calmly, like she'd been expecting me. I nodded cautiously, too exhausted to lie. "I've been sent to protect you and ensure you receive what your grandmother intended you to have." She introduced herself as Mirabelle Kent, a retired intelligence operative who'd worked with Evangeline decades ago on matters she didn't immediately explain. Over hot tea in her cabin, Mirabelle spread out maps and documents that made my head spin. She explained networks of accounts, shell companies, and properties I'd never known existed. With her help, I could finally begin understanding the true scale of my inheritance. But more importantly, she could help me navigate the traps Grant had already set. "Your ex-husband has been planning this for years," Mirabelle said grimly. "He knew Evangeline was protecting something valuable. Now we need to move faster than he can." Mirabelle spread the estate documents across her cabin table, each one revealing another layer of deception. Bank ledgers showed transactions spanning decades. Property deeds listed holdings across 4 continents. Shell companies all led back to connections with Caraway Enterprises, Grant's business. "He used your grandmother's name without permission," Mirabelle said, her finger tracing a pattern through the papers. "He's been siphoning money that was meant for your trust fund for at least 15 years. My hands clenched involuntarily. Grant had always said the company's success was ours, that we'd built it together. Now I understood he'd meant it was his to take, including money that had never belonged to him. In one file, I found a hidden transaction code that matched the safe deposit key from the vault. Mirabelle leaned forward intently. "If we locate that deposit box, we'll have the leverage to destroy everything he's built on lies." I was about to respond when headlights cut through the trees outside. Multiple vehicles, moving fast toward the cabin. Mirabelle's expression hardened. "He's found us already. We need to leave now." But Grant's men were faster than we'd anticipated, surrounding the cabin before we could reach the back exit. The cabin erupted into chaos within seconds. Shouts outside, flashlights sweeping through windows, the sharp crack of someone kicking the front door. Mirabelle moved with surprising speed for someone her age, shoving something heavy into my hands. "A pistol." "You don't shoot unless you absolutely must," she said firmly. "But right now, we need to vanish." She pulled up a section of the floor near the fireplace, revealing a narrow trapdoor I never would have noticed. We dropped into darkness, crawling through a dirt tunnel while above us the cabin filled with Grant's hired men. I heard them yelling, furniture being overturned, one voice shouting, "Bring her out alive." The tunnel seemed endless, my knees scraping against rocks, my breath coming in gasps. Heat from above told me they'd set fire to the cabin, trying to smoke us out or destroy evidence. When we finally emerged into a forest clearing half a mile away, the night sky behind us glowed orange with flames. Mirabelle smiled grimly despite our situation. He'll think we died in there. Good. Let him bury the wrong body while we regroup. I exhaled shakily, still clutching the key and documents I'd managed to save. The war between us had truly begun now. We reached Manhattan just as dawn broke over the city. Mirabelle navigated us through streets I barely recognized to an old law office tucked between gleaming glass towers. Inside, a frail man with kind eyes waited in an office filled with leather-bound books. Your grandmother anticipated exactly this scenario, Arthur Penley whispered, his voice thin with age. I'm her former legal executor. She created something she called a contingency fund, held in Zurich under the most secure conditions possible, accessible only by your biometric verification. My breath caught. So, I'm the final key to everything? Arthur nodded slowly. Yes. But understand this, Sylvia. The moment you access that fund, Grant will know you're alive. The system is designed to alert all interested parties. It's a trap and a weapon at the same time. I looked at Mirabelle, who nodded encouragingly. Then I smiled, feeling something sharp and determined settle in my chest. Then let him know. He taught me how to play his games over 38 years of marriage. He just never expected I'd eventually play them better than he does. Arthur pulled out plane tickets and account information. My next stop was Switzerland, where the Real inheritance waited. The private bank in Zurich looked like something from a spy movie, all polished marble and discreet security. A banker led me to a vault deep underground, where my fingerprint opened a digital system that hummed to life. What appeared on the screens made my breath stop completely. My grandmother hadn't just left money. She'd left evidence. Decades of records proving Grant's corporate fraud, illegal bribes, forged signatures on contracts worth millions. All meticulously documented and tied directly to his name. You could destroy him within hours with this information, the banker said quietly, his accent precise. Every regulatory agency, every business partner, every investor would turn against him immediately. I stared at the screens, watching file after file load. Grant's entire empire built on deception, just like his relationship with me had been. But then I thought about my grandmother's letter, about wisdom and patience. Or, I said softly, more to myself than the banker, I could let him destroy himself by giving him enough rope. I copied all the files onto encrypted drives, ensuring I had complete documentation. Then I left the vault with a calm smile, my mind already planning the next several moves. Outside, the Swiss air felt cleaner somehow. Time to let him think he's winning, I told Mirabelle. Then we take everything. Back in New York 2 days later, headlines screamed from every business publication. Grant Caraway announces $100 million merger. I sat in my modest hotel room, sipping tea and watching him on the news. He looked confident, powerful, completely unaware of what was coming. Mirabelle frowned from across the room. He's making his final major move, consolidating everything before someone can stop him. I nodded slowly. Exactly. And I'm going to help him complete that merger. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I'd learned something important from my grandmother's documents. Sometimes the best way to trap someone was to give them exactly what they wanted. I called Grant's office, disguising my voice as a representative from an investment firm. Please inform Mr. Caraway that the Zurich party is extremely interested in backing his merger deal. We'd like to schedule a meeting. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized. Grant's personal cell. Sylvia? This is impossible. You're supposed to be dead. I smiled at the screen, typing a simple response. Oh, it's very possible. And I have a business proposition for you. The pieces were moving exactly where I needed them. I arrived at the high-rise lounge overlooking the Hudson River, dressed in a tailored gray suit I'd purchased with money from selling my grandmother's documents to a collector. Well, copies of documents. The originals were safely locked away. Grant stood across the room with his security detail, his smug expression faltering the moment he saw me walk through the door. "Sylvia," he breathed, genuine disbelief cracking his usual confidence. I allowed a faint smile to form as I approached. "Yes, it's really me. And I believe we have quite a lot to discuss, don't we?" His men tensed, hands moving toward their jackets. But I remained perfectly calm, decades of watching powerful people bluff giving me confidence. Every gesture I made was deliberate, every step measured. This was my performance, and I'd rehearsed it in my mind 1,000 times during the journey here. Grant gestured for his security to stand down, though his eyes never left my face. He was trying to read me, to understand how I'd survived and what I wanted. Good. Let him wonder. Let him underestimate the woman he'd mocked in her own kitchen. I took a seat at the table, crossing my legs and folding my hands like we were discussing weather instead of his potential destruction. I placed a tablet on the glass table between us, turning it so he could see the screen clearly. His face went pale as he recognized what he was looking at. "Everything you thought was hidden is now completely illuminated," I said calmly. "Every illegal transaction, every forged document, every bribe you've paid over the past 20 years. Grant's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his eye. "You can't possibly," he started, but I raised one finger to stop him. "I can, and I will, if it becomes necessary." I watched him scroll through the copied Zurich records, his expression shifting from shock to fear to calculation. Evidence of offshore accounts under fake names. Fraudulent merger documents. Embezzlement schemes tied directly to his signature. Everything the authorities would need to dismantle Caraway Enterprises and put him in prison for decades. My heart remained steady, my breathing calm. My grandmother's foresight had prepared me perfectly for this exact moment. This wasn't about revenge, though that would be satisfying. This was about justice, about reclaiming value that had been stolen. Grant looked up from the tablet, his famous charisma completely stripped away. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. I smiled. "I want you to listen very carefully to my terms." "You always underestimated me," I said quietly, watching him struggle with the reality of his situation. "You thought losing your control over me after the divorce meant you'd won. But your arrogance was always your biggest weakness." I reminded him of specific moments. The boardroom meeting where he'd taken credit for my marketing strategy. The party where he'd introduced his assistant as his real partner, while I stood 10 feet away. The months after my firing when he'd laughed at my misfortune instead of offering basic human compassion. With each memory I voiced, he seemed to physically shrink. His shoulders hunched. His confident posture collapsed. He was finally realizing that his control had evaporated completely. I held nothing back, yet my voice remained measured and precise. "No shouting, no dramatics. Just clear, calm truth. This is what happens when you mistake someone's silence for weakness," I continued. "When you assume patience means powerlessness. You taught me that lesson through decades of dismissal. Now you're learning it from the other side." Grant tried one last desperate move, leaning forward with false confidence. "You release this information, and I'll make sure everyone knows about your family secrets. About Evangeline's questionable business practices. I'll destroy her legacy." I'd been waiting for exactly this threat. I'd already anticipated his attempt at mutually assured destruction. That's why I'd spent the previous week carefully leaking selected portions of his fraud to trusted journalists. Nothing that would hurt innocent employees or tank pension funds. Just enough to start asking questions. To make his partners nervous. Within hours of my strategic leaks, Grant's empire began trembling. Stock prices dipped. Business partners started calling for emergency meetings. Investors demanded audits. When he stormed back to our meeting location the next day, red-faced and shouting threats, I was calmly sipping tea. Mirabelle watched from a nearby table, her expression approving. "I warned you, Grant," I said without raising my voice. "You built your entire house on deception and theft. Now you're watching it crumble exactly the way structures built on lies always do." He slammed his hands on the table, causing other patrons to stare. But his rage only made him look more unhinged, more desperate. I remained perfectly still, letting his tantrum exhaust itself. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just about money, I realized. It was about clarity, about understanding that real power comes from patience and preparation, not volume. Grant collapsed into the chair across from me, his fight finally draining away. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. I handed him a thick envelope, unmarked and sealed. His hands actually shook as he took it. "Inside is everything you need to save yourself and your company," I said calmly. "But only if you cooperate completely with my terms." He stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Why would you help me after everything?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Because even arrogance deserves a single chance at redemption. But that chance only exists under my complete control and my rules." He opened the envelope slowly. Inside were transfer codes, legal permissions, and documents granting me absolute oversight of Caraway Enterprises. Every major decision would require my approval. Every financial move would be transparent and documented. He would remain as figurehead CEO, but I would hold the actual power. Grant's face went through a spectrum of emotions as he processed what this meant. Humiliation, relief, fear. He was being given a lifeline, but one that came with complete surrender. "You'll own me," he said quietly. I smiled. "No. I'll own the truth about your company. You'll finally have to operate ethically, help people instead of exploiting them, and rebuild something worth respecting." My grandmother's foresight ensured I would hold every key that matters, both literally and figuratively. He signed the documents with a trembling hand. 3 weeks later, I walked into the Caraway Enterprises boardroom for the first time as the person who actually controlled everything. Grant sat at the far end of the long table, pale and rigid. The board members looked confused, having been summoned without explanation. I distributed copies of the Zurich evidence and transfer documents to each person. Murmurs filled the room as they read, shock and understanding spreading across their faces. They looked at me with expressions I'd never seen directed at me before. Respect, curiosity, even a little fear. "Your grandmother built more than just a fortune," I began, my voice steady and clear. "She built a philosophy about responsibility. From today forward, this company exists for purpose, not just profit. We will operate ethically, transparently, and with genuine concern for the people our business decisions affect." Grant tried to interrupt, but the board's attention remained locked on me. They just learned that everything they thought they knew about the company's ownership was wrong. That the woman they'd probably dismissed as Grant's ex-wife actually held all the power. I had the room. I had the control. And I was just beginning to implement the changes my grandmother had planned decades ago. For the first time in my 63 years, I felt completely, undeniably powerful. After the meeting ended, I received an urgent message. Grant had hired someone to steal the original Zurich files, thinking copies wouldn't hold up legally. I smiled at the predictability of it. My grandmother had anticipated exactly this kind of desperation, leaving multiple authentic copies and deliberate traps for anyone who tried to destroy evidence. I arranged to meet the operative in a dim alley behind the financial district. He thought he had leverage, waving a USB drive he'd stolen from my hotel room. I let him talk, let him think he'd outsmarted me. Then I calmly explained that the drive contained mirrored files that would trigger automatic notifications to federal investigators if accessed improperly. His confident expression crumbled. The files were useless to him, designed to fail outside proper authorization. He'd just implicated himself in corporate espionage. He fled, leaving behind evidence that traced directly back to Grant. I now held both moral and tactical advantages, every move Grant made only tangling him further in consequences. Mirabelle appeared from the shadows, having watched the entire exchange. "Your grandmother taught you well," she said. I nodded, understanding that this was about more than just wealth. It was about becoming the person she'd always known I could be. The betrayal came from inside Grant's own operation. His personal assistant, Livia Merton, appeared at my hotel room with trembling hands and red eyes. "He's planning to sell parts of the company to offshore entities," she admitted, her voice breaking. "He thinks if he can liquidate certain divisions before you notice, he can still escape with enough money to disappear." I let her speak without interruption, nodding occasionally. When she finished, I simply said, "Thank you, Livia. You just ensured his complete downfall." Using her detailed information, I prepared legal maneuvers and public disclosures that would make Grant's next desperate move completely self-defeating. Every asset he tried to sell was frozen. Every contact he reached out to received warnings about ongoing federal investigations. He had no idea I was controlling both the narrative and the leverage, staying 3 steps ahead of every plan he made. My calm, methodical approach made him flail and panic while I orchestrated each step with precision. My grandmother's training through decades of patience was finally showing its full value. Grant was trapped in a prison of his own creation, while I held every key. The only question remaining was whether I would show mercy or complete the destruction he'd earned. Grant finally confronted me in the private study of what used to be our shared penthouse. Security had let him up because I'd instructed them to allow this meeting. His hands shook as he stood before my desk. "Just destroy me if that's what you want," he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. I held up the envelope containing his complete legal and financial fate, watching decades of ego collapse before me. I had the power to ruin him utterly, to see him imprisoned, bankrupt, humiliated beyond recovery. Everything I'd suffered during our marriage and its aftermath could be avenged. But my grandmother's teachings echoed in my mind. Wisdom, patience, purpose beyond revenge. "No, Grant," I said softly but firmly. "I will not destroy you, but everything you built on lies will now serve truth and genuine good." I presented him with conditional terms. He would retain limited power within the company, but only if he followed strict ethical guidelines. The fortune would remain largely intact, but it would fund humanitarian initiatives, employee benefits, and community programs. His arrogance would be replaced with accountability. He swallowed hard, defeated but also visibly relieved. He'd expected complete annihilation. Instead, I was offering structured redemption, a chance to become something better than what he'd been. "This is your one opportunity," I said. "Don't waste it." 3 months passed. Caraway Enterprises flourished under new management principles. Grant's arrogance was tempered by constant accountability. The board, now loyal to the ethical mandate I'd established, implemented programs my grandmother would have been proud of. Humanitarian projects launched in her name were already saving lives across multiple continents. I sat in my study reviewing letters from beneficiaries. A single mother whose medical bills were forgiven. A scholarship student attending college because of our foundation. A village in Kenya receiving clean water infrastructure. My heart felt full in a way wealth alone could never achieve. Mirabelle visited that evening, and we toasted quietly to my grandmother's memory and foresight. The journey had transformed me from a woman society had dismissed as too old and irrelevant into someone who understood her true value, had never depended on others' recognition. The phone from the Zurich vault, the one symbolizing my grandmother's legacy, buzzed with new coordinates. Another project that needed attention, another opportunity to make a difference. I smiled, understanding that responsibility never truly ends. The work continues. The world tested us both, I whispered to my grandmother's photograph on the desk. But we endured, and now we give back. The phone buzzed again, and I answered it without hesitation. My work, my purpose was only beginning. And that's how I turned betrayal into justice, and inherited not just wealth, but a legacy of wisdom my grandmother left for me. Remember, it's never too late to rise above those who doubt you. If you love this story, don't forget to subscribe and click the end screen for more thrilling tales just like this. Every story is a journey, and the next one could shock you even more. Thanks for watching.